seaside resort of Southend-On-Sea has long been a haven for holidaymakers, but the town also harbours some ghoulish inhabitants. This revealing collection of tales from around the town includes ghostly sightings in Britterwell Priory, ominous sounds and smells on the seafront, and tales of mysterious shapes at the town's pubs and taverns. With over 60 illustrations, Haunted Southend is guaranteed to make your blood run cold. I live in the Essex area, and I spent a lot of my youth in Southend when I was a college student, and so I have actually visited some of these places in the book. This image on the front is the Kurzel at the seafront, and there used to be a bar in there and an arcade and a bowling alley and stuff like that, so I've been in the Kurzel quite a few times. I don't think it's the Kurzel anymore, I'm not too sure. Might be something else now. Contents: 1. Haunted houses. 2. Haunted churches and rectories. 3. Haunted commercial buildings. 4. Haunted open spaces. 5. Haunted watering holes. 6. Unlikely haunted locations. 7. Phantom docks. Then epilogue and bibliography. Introduction. It is not necessary to believe in ghosts to be aware that there are things outside our understanding. The 21st century has left behind the heyday of Victorian ghosts on unlit country roads and in gloomy rooms lit only by oil lamps, but the stories linger on and are still in their ascendancy. Ghost lore is a part of folklore and of local and human history, and its popularity is consolidated not just by English literature, but by the rise in television programmes and websites devoted to ghost hunting and contact with the spirit world. One of the difficulties of researching ghosts and the paranormal is that many apparitions are seen by one person at a time, and thus are without independent corroboration. So this book is based on published reports and on interviews with witnesses about their experiences, with some second-hand accounts. Some of the published reports and second and third-hand accounts are obviously not always reliable, and in some cases are certainly embroidered in the retelling. This does not mean that the origin or the core is not true. Of course, the many people I met during research for Haunted Southend, not one come across as anything but genuine and honest. Certainly, I have had the unexpected and eye-opening opportunity to meet a clairvoyant, a medium, a spiritualist, and to correspond with ghost hunters. A psychic medium and a spirit photographer, all outside my normal social remit. This book is intended to report local experiences to entertain readers, to look into mysteries, and is for everyone with an open mind and a curiosity about life and death. Believers will have their faith reinforced, and the skeptic will have something to think about. Given Southend's fairly recent appearance as an influential Essex presence, since effectively the coming of the railway, prior to which it was merely the south end of Britterwell, and the ghost stories within these pages encompass surrounding areas. Some are quite separate entities. From Canewden, Stanbridge and Holbridge in the north, still rural, to Rayleigh in the west, and Fownis in the east, but all are within just a few miles of what is now known as Southend-On-Sea. These villages and suburbs homes have just as much to offer in way of paranormal as does Southend itself, if not more. Also know that, for me, the Southend-On-Sea area includes Leigh-on-Sea, Westcliff, On-Sea and Shoeburyness. Haunted houses. From little terraced houses to apartments or detached dwellings, the ramshackle to the ostentatious, the following places have stories from the past and the present. In most cases, the locations are identified by the street or road rather than anything more specific, to avoid attracting the ghoulish and of course. Some have been demolished during the modern redevelopment of the Southend area. The idea of a house being haunted has different effects on different people. Sutherland Lodge in Britterwell, for instance, once part of a farm, once a school, and once named Blue House, dating back to 1600s, was renamed when it was thought to be haunted, as it was proving difficult to sell. At the other extreme, in 2006, a cottage in Hawkwell was marketed as "Pick up your very own haunted house for a mere £445,000. Royal Terrace. In January 1976, Raymond Lamont Brown wrote about the contents of a fascinating journal belonging to his late grandfather, entitled Miss Warren's Essex Ghost Book. One particular chapter, reproduced in the Essex Chronicle, featured a house in the historic location overlooking the town's pier. Because the journal, which covers the years 1887 to 1893, is handwritten, it is impossible to attribute the origins of this particular haunting to a particular number. It could be number 1, Royal Terrace, number 7 or number 9. What is clear is the reference to a Mr. George Martin who was staying in the house during the 1970s, preparing for bed, when the flame of his candle turned suddenly blue. Not only that, he heard a loud clatter, felt the temperature drop, and saw 2 livid eyes full of pain and utmost devilry. Bravely, Mr. Martin, as he watched an image from around the eyes, was able to find his voice, asking the intruder, "Who is it? What do you want?" At which the spectre vanished. He informed his host immediately, the latter conceding that this was not the first time he had heard about the ghostly visitation, the difference being that Mr. Martin was one of the first to do anything other than flee. The next day the same thing happened, and again Mr. Martin stood his ground. The identical sequence of events was repeated, but this time the face was clearer. A protruding forehead and dark hair, dark eyebrows, 2 yellow swollen eyelids and cheeks of purple hue surrounded by leprous white. The face stared out of the gloom and glistened unhealthily in the candlelight for several minutes. He had no opportunity this time of repeating his request, or any other, because the apparition did not linger for long. This story services against in an article by Wesley Downs in issue number 4 of Essex Ghosts and Hauntings, the main difference being the attribution of the explanation for the apparition. For Mr. Downs, it was the host or landlord that revealed all. The host had heard that someone had died of leprosy in the very room some 20 years earlier. Mr. Lamont Brown, however, indicates that it was Miss Warren who discovered the history behind the earlier death in the haunted bedroom, but there is no reference to its being leprosy, only a strange and then unheard of disease. A few yards away is the one imposing Clifton Court, a red brick building on the corner of Royal Mews and Royal months later, a cowled grey shape with some facial features visible appeared in the same vicinity as Dawn, but on being challenged, it again disappeared. This time an unpleasant, earthly, musty odour was left behind, although the couple called in a vicar to exorcise the room. They never felt comfortable there and moved out soon after. Royal Terrace, one of the oldest residential streets in Southend, was built at the end of the 18th century, overlooking the estuary. It started life as a grand terrace with a library and hotel as its eastern end, built as added attractions for the genteel. However, it struggled to achieve its aim until Princess Caroline, the wife of Prince Regent, took over and central dwellings here in 1803. Number 7 as a drawing room, number 8 for dining, and number 9 for sleeping. Royal Terrace around 1909. Little has changed today. So up here is the top of Southend High Street. Here you got the Royals on the right hand corner, and that road starts heading into Westcliff. This road takes you down to Adventure Island and the pier, Southend Pier, which is over here, and then this road takes you down Pier Hill towards all the arcades. So this road looks very similar to how it did then. It does look very similar. The pier and the top of the pier has all been redone. It is a bit more built up now. It looks a bit more modern. But yeah, close up there. It was this visit that resulted in the change of name to Royal, and this surviving Georgian terrace was also visited by Lady Emma Hamilton and Lord Nelson, 1803 and 1805. Such history should have perhaps resulted in more romantic ghosts, but their sojourns were probably too brief to leave a lasting impression, although there is a Lady H room and a Nelson lookout in the Hamiltons Boutique Hotel in Royal Terrace, plus Princess Caroline and Prince Regent rooms in the Pier View Hotel. There are no reports of hauntings. Royal News. When Tonio Perrott moved into his home in 1988, he needed a lot of work, and he called in an architect to assist him. The architect set about removing an internal wall, which turned out to be 5 bricks deep, revealing a small room complete with a wagon wheel and a skeleton. The skeleton was draped over the wheel as if it had dozed off there and not woken again, and there was still some remnants of clothing, including an ancient cloth cap. Obviously, the police had to be called in, but the mystery of his identity remains unsolved. The assumption is that he was the old man who lived there previously. It comes as no surprise then to hear that this Mews cottage has since been haunted by an old man holding a walking stick out in front of him. His first appearance on the stairs gave Tonio's wife quite a fright, but he is now happy to live alone with his ghost, who is a benevolent presence. Tonio has also been conscious of what appears to be a second separate image, which is no more than a black shadow which appears at certain times of the month. He can see this shape out of the corner of his eye, and it is always preceded by an intense drop in temperature. A visitor with psychic abilities claims to have spoken to this second spirit, identified as a man in his 40s with a malformed hand and a degenerative illness of some kind. Just before midnight on Christmas Eve every year, a very special event takes place on the 4 century. What is particularly fascinating about this is the fact that the sounds and smells are witnessed by several people, and it does not occur at other times. Tonio's theory is that the combined energy of a number of people results in this annual visitation. The Mews cottages here were built around 1970, originally as stables for the large mansion-type houses in Royal Terrace. Given their age and provenance, those bricks no doubt have a lot more stories to tell. Gordon Road. A man who lived here with his family for 3 years moved in when the owner retired abroad in around 2004. He knew before moving in that the house had a reputation for being haunted, but kept this to himself, even though he too heard movements on the upper floor when no one was there. However, he also heard footsteps on the stairs coming downstairs and into the room where he was sitting, followed by a touch on his shoulder, with again no one visible. One more occasion, his partner, who was sitting in the corner of the room, had also been aware of and was scared by the sound of footsteps entering the room. This prompted her to investigate further. She went upstairs to ask her daughter if she had been playing in the hall. The girl's answer not only confirmed that she had not been downstairs, but suggested that it could have been the other little girl. When questioned further, the girl described this other girl as being happy, blonde, and as someone who liked to play in the hall and look into the rooms, apparently on a regular basis. As a child, this had seemed perfectly normal to her, not worth mentioning. Further probing revealed that this same blonde girl had been seen by earlier residents. The earlier history of the house had additional reports of extreme cold in the upstairs back bedroom and on the landing, but this is not necessarily connected to the happy girl seen in the hallway. But what is an unexplained coincidence is a report from a house in Ashburnham Road, very close by, of an incidental blonde child laughing and playing in the hall. Gainsborough Drive. In December 1990, not only the local Evening Echo, as it was then called, but the National Sunday Telegraph ran a story of violent pre-Christmas spirit. First the police and then an exorcist were called to the house after its occupant had discovered his 2-year-old son floating 5 feet in the air and screaming out for him to look at the woman in the ceiling. The father had thought his son was sleeping until he heard him shouting. And he himself felt something on the stairs on his way up to see the child. The police reported furniture having been seemingly hurled across the room, and it was even said that the family dog had been seen flying through the air. A man's wife missed the excitement as she was in hospital giving birth. Her husband, however, was understandably distraught and asked the police to call in an exorcist. However, a local chaplain refused to perform this task, fearing that something more violent and unrecognisable might be unleashed. Although the proceedings were taken very seriously by the police, who confirmed that there was no evidence to suggest that the man had been drinking, there was little that they could do as no crime had been committed. It seemed that this was not the first supernatural experience the boy's father had had, and he had in fact sensed a conflict of forces in the house since moving in some 3 years earlier, between who he suggested as an earlier female occupant, or perhaps her grandmother, and an unidentifiable male. Could the child have been at the centre of some kind of spectral tug of war? Interestingly, a Florence Dennis was killed by a gunshot in the head in 1894, a crime for which her lover, James Carnham Reed, was subsequently hanged. Coincidence? Probably, though you never know. So that concludes this video on Haunted Southend. I really enjoyed reading that. I hope you did too. Let me know if you